Well, it's time for my sowing and growing video for November today, and I'm in this kind of packed greenhouse full of spiders' webs and kind of being attacked by tomatoes. But I am going to be actually giving this greenhouse a complete clear out probably tomorrow. So I'll take a lot of things to the allotment. So things like these early carrots, the late carrots rather, all of these beetroot and chard leaves that we're using for the salads. The peppers will go outside because they're pretty much finished. They'll just ripen off out there. I will bring all of these tomatoes and strawberries back inside, but I'll take a lot of the seedlings to the polytunnel because I treat it as a bit like a fire break. Get it all cleaned, all disinfected, all the windows cleaned, all the floors swept over and things like that, and then start progressively bringing things back in here for my winter harvest and spring veggies. So, right, let's start off with what I did in October and how things are going. And I'll touch on a few things from late September as well. So I've just been potting on actually the brassicas that I sowed in September, and they are a bit behind where they usually are because they've been growing in this greenhouse, and it looks quite sunny right now, but it is about 12:50 and so it's actually quite shaded in here pretty much most of the morning now because the sun sort of falls behind those houses down there, and it's kind of shaded in the evening as well. So things are a little bit behind where they would be, as I said, in a normal year on the allotment in the polytunnel, which is in full sun, which is interesting. I'm not too worried about it. I think there's plenty of time for everything to catch up, but yeah. So next up, green garlic, all that's in. It's just starting to sprout. All the rest of my garlic is all in. The spare pak choi and tatsoi and komatsuma that I've got, that's here in this tray. That's looking okay. And I will be planting that out probably in 2 weeks' time after my autumn carrots are finished. So quite pleased with the way that's coming on. Marathon calabrese, Orkney cauliflowers, graffiti cauliflowers, they're all just down here. They're looking okay. As I say, they're slightly behind, maybe 2 weeks behind where they normally would be. And I'll just have to see what the effect of that is. It might mean they're about a week late coming into harvest in spring, but it might not be because they will be coming back in here and growing under grow lights for a bit of the time, so they might just catch up. The spinach for spring, so that's spinach responder and spinach rubino, that is almost ready for planting out. I haven't quite decided where I'm going to plant that yet. That's going to be a bit of a challenge. But all the rest of the spinach that we're eating in autumn and winter obviously is growing fine. Quite happy with all of that. First succession of broad beans has just, I don't know where they are now. I must have moved them somewhere. They have just broken surface, so I'll probably put them in the car ready to take to the allotment. So they're going to get planted out in a container and go in the polytunnel for a really early harvest. I tend to try and harvest those sometime in early May, so it's about 3 or 4 weeks earlier than I'll get them in the ground. The next batch of broad beans here haven't quite broken surface yet, so I only just sowed those in the middle of October. The next batch, so I've got all these beet leaves and chard leaves, which I've loved in the salad, especially when they're smaller. The next succession of those I've just brought into the greenhouse there, and they've just germinated. They're a bit leggy, but they've just germinated down there. The first succession of peas, they're up here. They're going to grow in a container in this greenhouse, and I'll do a few successions of peas ending for my early peas in January, and then I'll obviously have main crop peas later on. And lettuces that I sowed, I've just pricked those out. So in the October lettuces, half of those are going to go in this polytunnel, in these big trays that I've got stored under here. And they just kind of slot down there under these grow lights. And I'm looking to harvest that first succession in December. Then I'll have more successions that I'll talk about later. And I think, one more thing. The Napoli carrots, I've sown the first succession of those. They're the ones we'll be harvesting in early May. And I'll have another succession in a couple of weeks' time. They're the ones we'll be harvesting in June. So they're in containers in the polytunnel. Elephant garlic's all in. All the other garlic's all in. And I've started harvesting my yacon. I know some people don't harvest yacon as early as me. I really like yacon, so I want to start harvesting it as soon as possible. And we have enough to last us. So there's no point really waiting until December unless you haven't got enough, to last you, and you want it as big as possible. I don't really mind harvesting a bit smaller. In fact, I think the harvest is perfectly acceptable at this time of year, and I'll just show you a quick picture of one of the tubs that I harvested of the yacon. Most of my yacon's in the ground, and of course the tubers are much bigger in the ground than in the tubs, but still quite respectable. Field beans are in. And that's it. So let's get on to November. All the details, by the way, of everything that I'm looking at on my iPad, they're all down in the description below. So there's a link to the database. You can look at what I'm looking at. So next up, if you sow onions from sets, you can still sow them or plant them in November, early November. I actually think for red onion sets, it's better to put them in November. They'll be smaller in early spring and they won't think that they're in their second year and run to seed. I often find red onions run to seed if you put them in October because they're just too big then by the time they get to early spring. As I say, they think they're in second year and they go to seed. Same with the yellow onions, but they're less susceptible to go into seed. So Red Winter, Shenshu Yellow are both good varieties. I don't do them from sets anymore. I do all my onions from seed, and one of the batches of onions is out there, Tough Ball, and I've got another one on the allotment, and so I'm looking to harvest those. I'll probably start harvesting them in June. Depends on whether we start running out of onions in the store. If we don't, then we leave them, and if we do, then we start harvesting them a bit smaller. So if you haven't put your carrots in yet for a May-June harvest, now's the time to do it. Now's the last time to do it, really. Very early November. If you leave it much after that, then they're not big enough really to survive the harsh conditions of winter, even in a polytunnel. I always put mine in a polytunnel. But if you put them in early November, then they've germinated by the end of November, and then I've got about 3 weeks with enough light levels to put on just enough growth to make them strong enough to sort of get through, as I say, the low light level period of winter. And then they really burst into life towards the end of February, and then you could start harvesting them in late April, but I think it's just better to think of them as a May-June harvest. So next up, Napoli, in case I didn't mention that. Next up are lettuces that are going to go again in here on this bench here underneath these grow lights here. So it's my second succession, this one for harvest in January. And then I've got another succession which I'll harvest in February. And I have loads and loads of lettuce on the allotment. So why do I recommend growing them under lights in a greenhouse? Well, it comes down to leaf quality and varieties. So lettuce is perfectly kind of acceptable, harvested all the way through winter, but the leaf quality is low. The number of leaves you can harvest is low. By leaf quality, I mean that the leaves are a bit limp, basically, is what it comes down to. Whereas grown in here, they're very prolific because they're under lights and they're a bit warmer. They're crisp and crunchy, and they've got a lot more colour. So they've got a lot more reds and bronzes and things like that in them. They've got nice crunchy ribs and all of that. So I like them as a complement. It takes the pressure off harvesting the allotment beds, so they come through a stronger plants in spring. And it means, as I say, I will still harvest some off the allotment, but basically it gives me some nice crisp and lots of colour in the salad mixes in midwinter. So I am doing my favourite spring varieties really. So that is Riccia, Navara, Lola Rossa, Canasta, Flashy Lightning Butter Oak, and Halflex. Yeah, and then I'll do a batch of my favourite spring variety of spinach, again to grow in here, again for small crisp salad leaves, which I can't get on the allotment. I can get plenty of spinach off the allotment, perfectly good for cooking, but it's not that great in a salad. And if you want to do any garlic, now's really the sort of, you know, towards the middle of November is about the latest I do my garlic here. You might be able to get away with it a bit later, but you know, pretty much any bed that I'm going to have empty for garlic is going to be empty by the middle of November. Same with green garlic. I do a lot of green garlic because we tend to run out of stored garlic in about the middle to the end of April, and so then we transition over to green garlic, which is just immature, ordinary garlic, but it's just immature, and that is really beautiful. I actually prefer it to true dried garlic, basically. Yeah, it's really great. You can still eat the bulb, but you eat the whole bulb as one, a bit like an onion, and you can eat the stem as well, and the stem is kind of like a garlicky leek. It's really nice green garlic. So if you've got a bit of space, just bung a few cloves of garlic in for harvest in April and May. One more succession of broad beans, and then I'll wait until next year for any more successions. And I will only do my broad beans at this time of year in modules and plant them out under fleece, because it's a bit too, well, the mice are getting hungry is what it comes down to. They just dig up all of the beans and eat them if I don't do them in modules at this time of year. And I'll do two different types of spring cabbage. I'll do Caraflex and Offinum too. I always like to do a couple of varieties just in case for whatever reason one doesn't thrive, then the other one always seems to. It's obviously very late for spring cabbage, but I find again, grown in the warmth of a greenhouse under grow lights for a few hours in the morning and a few hours at night, not all day long, they thrive, and they're nice big plants ready to plant out in sort of, you know, middle of February, late February, March time, for a nice harvest in sort of May, early June. I will do another batch of Asian greens. Tatsoi, Red Senpacho and Komatsuma are my sort of go-to Asian greens, and those are the follow-on crop for the ones that are in the polytunnel at the moment. The ones in the polytunnel will go to seed in February, so this batch being a little bit later, a couple of months later, they won't go to seed until well into spring. And I'll have another succession that I'll start in sort of January, February time as well, and they'll go on until late spring. But I like a nice continuous supply of Asian greens, and this is the way that I do it. And then the next one is, if I need it, I don't always need it, but again, some more spring of my favourite spring varieties of spinach, which is Responder and Rubino. And again, as beds start to open up, so I might have harvested a bed of lettuce, for example, I just pop in some spinach, and then that'll be ready in sort of March time, probably towards the end of March. Start harvesting it as baby leaves for salads, and then let it grow on for big mature leaves for cooking. And then my second succession of lettuce, probably the third succession of lettuce, the ones that we'll be going to be eating in early February. And then by about mid-February, the lettuces on the allotment in the ground, the leaf quality really starts to increase. as light levels increase in late February. And by the time we get to March, lettuce is back in full quality, really good quality again on the allotment. So the challenge with lettuce, as I say, is not having enough to harvest. Well, it's partly that. It's not really having enough to harvest. It's mainly having nice, colourful, crispy leaves to harvest. And that's why I like to do the grow light thing. The other nice thing about having them in the greenhouse is they just look really lovely. And it means if it's really foul weather, which it often is in midwinter, I don't have to go traipse into the allotment to harvest the salads. I can just come in here and pick them. It makes a world of difference. So that is it. Not very much going on in November, not very much going on in December either, but then in January everything really picks up, but still enough going on to keep life interesting. So as I say, all the details are down in the description. If you're interested, I do have a newsletter which comes out every week, which takes you through all of what's going on the allotment, in the garden, in the greenhouse, what I'm sowing, what I'm pricking out, what I'm planting, and just all sort of general information about gardening in that season. So, my name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.